Brian, Manchester City within 3 points of Arsenal ahead of that top of the table clash on Wednesday. They beat Aston Villa 3-1. At half time, it couldn't have been more straightforward. Villa made a fight of it in the second half. Did you learn anything about Manchester City today?
I think we did learn some things. Probably nothing that we hadn't seen before, where there's a bit of casualness defensively, not quite as ruthless in attack as they normally are when they get teams in position during today where they're 3-0 up. It usually gets worse for the opposition. Today it got better. Villa, you could say, won the second half of the match. City had several chances to kill them off completely. Instead of that, a little bit of caution and I'd say messiness came into the game as the game went on, and they ended up just winning 3-1 comfortably enough. But there was a few sticky moments where Ederson was called into action, whereas in the first half he was a complete onlooker to the game. So we learned that City are, I would think, more vulnerable defensively than they have been previously, less clinical in the attacking positions, and I'd say less dominant in the midfield area also. But on the plus side from Manchester City's point of view, I think having the two main centre backs back, Diaz and Laporte, was a real positive. I think the manager, he's a wise manager, he doesn't need me to say it, but I think it was a little bit of wisdom in changing Akanji and Ake and Lewis, young Rico Lewis. I didn't think they performed particularly well last week. I don't think they would have helped their case to beat Arsenal on Wednesday.
Well, that was maybe the most interesting thing about today, was the change in shape for Manchester City. Not for the first time we look at a Pep Guardiola team and go, what's he trying here? Is the obvious thing he puts Rodri in at centre back and they play four, but they played three at the back. They basically played a sort of 3-2-2-3 with Bernardo Silva in the middle of midfield alongside Rodri, Gundogan and De Bruyne in front. But Walker is one of a back three, which he's done with England before, but certainly not in this sort of shape. Try and get inside the mind of Pep Guardiola. What do you think he's thinking with moving to a back three? Is that with Arsenal in mind and Champions League in mind, or do you feel it might be a one-off?
I'm not sure what he's thinking, but I would think that one thing that would have come into his mind is that young Rico Lewis has had a run of games now, and he's put an awful lot of responsibility on him to play right back. 2 games ago he played right back. Last week he played left back with that kind of obligation to go in and be the extra midfielder in the way Cancelo has done it for them in recent seasons, and Zinchenko, both of whom were very, very good at it. But I thought he struggled at it last week, and Kulusevski gave him an awful problem down the right hand side for Tottenham last week with support from Emerson Royal. They didn't handle that very well. So I think his thinking was, I think it's a bit too much for young Lewis at this stage. Maybe the Arsenal match would be too much for him. We need to go to tried and tested, more experienced defensive players that we've had and used before. I wonder, deep inside him, has he regrets about letting Cancelo go? Because, and Zinchenko, in the one season when you think of, I know Cancelo played right backs, he played right back at times, but when Walker was at his best and fit, he plays right back, Cancelo left back, and Zinchenko was the cover for him, and Zinchenko was more than adequate cover and exceptionally good at times. So you've got 2 left backs gone, and you look at who's the next left back now? Is it Foden? Is it Grealish?
Laporte or Ake or...
Yeah, but is it one of the attacking players? Like today, there was no wing backs as such. Most teams that play 3 at the back, they play wing backs as well. But they weren't wing backs today. Mahrez is an outside right, an attacking outside right, advanced. Grealish the same. So it's hard to know what his thinking was.
Can you play like that against Arsenal against Saka and Martinelli?
Well, he might. He might, but that could leave them open. But he's never worried so much about that defensive aspect. We know that with Pep, it's always about dominating the game in the midfield area, and getting, as he said, the right passes from the midfield to the attacking players. That's always how he's taught. We go back to that Champions League final when they were beaten by Chelsea, and he didn't play Rodri and he didn't play Gundogan in the holding position midfield, and they got done in the match. It was a big open space in front of the centre backs and they were exposed. He's never had that mindset of that I needed to play defensive players, but he certainly, the three defensive players he played today without John Stones were the most effective, I think,
they're the three
that
best
he has
defenders
at the moment. Yes, and but I think the three of them will play. The question is, do all the other attacking players play against Arsenal? Will there be some concession to playing Ake possibly as a left back? As you said, he might be the next one in. Play him as a left back, and then Walker becomes that extra player to outnumber Arsenal in the midfield area, or at least even her up against Odegaard, Xhaka, Partey, to even her up in that central position. It could be Walker would be the one freed to do that, with Ake playing as the left full back, left central back in the three.
Walker is someone who always, it seems, plays in the big games when they can keep him fully fit. When we look back at the great Premier League defenders of the last 10 years, he's probably not a name that springs to mind straight away, but he's been a part of a hugely successful Manchester City team. He's been a big part of the England squad as well, as they've gone through a really successful spell. How good a player is he?
Well, he's been a fantastic player. He went from Spurs. Spurs would have been probably disappointed to lose him. He was an out-and-out right back for them. There's always a little bit, with his game, is about power, pace, strength. Not always great reading, I'd say, of the game as a defensive full-back. And there's often an error in him, a bit of wildness in his play. And we've seen that at City at times and with England at times, where he makes mistakes high up the pitch, and his recovery, while he has all the pace, it was almost like, to me, I'd say, the penny doesn't drop quick enough that they're in trouble and he's got to get himself back from that position. And that little bit of vulnerability and mistakes that I think that I spot in this game would reduce his presence in the list of great defensive players. But he's been part of a great Manchester City team, and a first choice pick, as you said, when he's fit. He's 32 now. Always with City's players, they've had such a good squad, not a deep squad, but such a solid group of about 18, 17, that he can rotate them. I always look at the figures at the end of the season, the start of a new season. You look at them, and there'll be about 8 or 9 players who play about between 27, 28 games and 32, 33. Very few players play 35, 36, 37, because he's always protecting them for something, whether it was Champions League, Cup games, whatever it is, rotating them. And Walker has been one of those that's up in the high numbers. So he's a key player for them. Though he's 32 now, we look at the reduction in the number of good defensive players they have, even though they've added Ake. Well, they've had Ake for a couple of years and he's played very little. He's playing much more now. Akanji's come in. He's played a surprising number of games. But Walker is a key player because they don't have any obvious full backs, but you see they have that talent in the group underneath. Rico Lewis comes in from the academy. You go, where does he come from? Outstanding. Went on the pre-season training or tour with them. Obviously impressed the manager. Decided he was good enough to play. And they've got players like that. And young Palmer's another one as an attacking player on the left-hand side. But it's such a big step because you're expected to win every week and to lose very few games. It's not about experimenting, giving fellas a chance. It's go in, do it at the top level. But Walker's a key player, and I've no doubts he'll start against Arsenal this week.
Not a lot to say about Erling Haaland, really, for once in this game. Played 45 minutes, got an assist, had 6 touches.
Yeah,
very go.
A couple of I'd say two of those touches, at least 2 of them were on the second goal, where he had to cut the ball back, check back from his left foot to his right foot. There was little opportunity for him to shoot with his right foot. As the ball came off Chambers' path, head into his path, Martinez was out of the goal. But Martinez did enough to get across and block the angle maybe for the shot. So then he checked back from his right onto his left, come back on his left and his right. So he had 3 of those touches were actually in the second on the second goal. It's not a lot of touches. He's in there, they tried to play it a bit earlier into positions where he makes those runs today, or makes those runs frequently. But today it was De Bruyne making the runs and he got onto it. So he was a distraction. I didn't think Concert or Chambers ever looked comfortable in the game, so you could say he had an impact on the game. But he didn't score, which is unusual. 20 of his goals have been, 18 of his goals have been at home.
Yeah, and 10 home games before this. Yeah, it's only the third home game he hasn't scored in.
Yeah, so I mean that's hope for Arsenal as well, and hope for the other teams. The goals have, we got 3 goals a match and a half ago, but they haven't been quite as free, I suppose, the number of goals he's been scoring lately. That's 1.5 matches without a goal. So there's hope for the other teams in the league that he's not going to end up with, Dixie Dean's type numbers in 56 or 54 or whatever.
It is going to be fascinating on Wednesday night, the biggest game of the season by far, Arsenal with the 3-point lead. Just to see what that team selection is from Pep Guardiola. There's every possibility he felt today he wanted to get the 2 centre-halves some game time. He maybe wanted to rest some players or just try a few things out. Generally, for these big games, it is a 4-3-3, and it's Rodri and De Bruyne and one of Bernardo Silva or Gundogan, and then either Foden or Grealish on the left, Mahrez on the right. Do you see him deviating from that on Wednesday night?
Well, if we look at today as an indicator, Foden didn't come on to the last 20 minutes, and you mentioned it in the commentary that he always plays in the big games, Foden. The 20 minutes he got today didn't do an awful lot. Did you say he has to start? That's a reminder to the manager. He has to start. Like if you ask me now what his team would be, and I'm not very good at predicting his team. I'm usually fairly good at predicting most other teams. I'd say the team will be the goalkeeper, obviously enough, Walker, Diaz, Laporte, another. Midfield, Rodri, Gundogan, De Bruyne, and Mahrez under a little bit of pressure. That's 2 weeks in a row he's been taken off, but I still have him down to start. Haaland centre forward, and a toss up between Foden and Grealish for that position. The fact that Grealish was taken off early, I said I think he'd be in the starting team, but then I think the manager will debate it in his head how influential Foden has been. So that's only leaving out the left back position, and I'm leaving that open because I can't ever predict his team. It's always end up, I try to go for 10 or 11. I usually end up with 7 or 8 right. So that's how I think it'll be. I think there'll be an element of respect. There'll be a lot of thought about Arteta knowing so much about how Pep thinks and how he lines up tactically. Arsenal are much more settled and predictable.
Are they? So let's move on to Arsenal then ahead of it, because maybe the argument against Arsenal now is that they're too predictable. I think it was unchanged starting 11 for 6 games in a row yesterday against Brentford. They're having their first little stutter where you watch them and think there's not quite the same spark or energy or speed or pace, and maybe some of the opposition teams are figuring out what they're about. I guess that's the challenge for any team looking to win the league. Teams will always figure you out, such as the quality of coaching. You got to be able to respond with something a little bit different. Yeah,
and you also have to be able to come up with something different and come up with personnel that are slightly different. Arsenal settled into that rhythm of the team very, very quickly, bar a little bit of change of full back, with Tierney getting in now and again in the left back position, right back position at times early on, but White has kind of solidified that position for himself. The midfield three sorted itself fairly quickly once all three are fit, and there's not been much change in there. But some of the players that have come in have not done great when they've come in. I saw, all Arsenal's Europa League games, and I wasn't particularly impressed with the replacements for that best 11. So, I don't.
But Trossard will be the one now.
Trossard haven't come in the transfer
well against United when he came on as well.
Yeah. That's probably it. But Martinelli gives him so much pace. You know, I know he's a young player. Saka's a young player, and Ketch's a young player. Don't have the option of Jesus to come back in yet. I don't see much change. I mean, who would come into the midfield that might improve the midfield? I don't see Vieri been good enough yet, you know.
Smith Rowe's never fit.
Smith Rowe is, I don't see them having, you know, Tierney gives them a bit of energy when he comes in the full back position, but not, you know, I don't see that, and I think for that reason that it'll be still the same side, the same starting 11.
The one thing that stood out from the weekend, maybe aside from the VAR controversy in the offside, is that a lot of teams, it feels like, are struggling to get into a rhythm at the moment. Like Chelsea obviously are in a state of flux with the amount of players who have come in, and there were signs yesterday that they were maybe getting it a bit better ahead of the Champions League, but Newcastle are hitting a rocky patch where it's not coming quite as easy to them. Like Tottenham, after the brilliance of last week against City, get beaten out of the park. There's talk that Bentancur may have a really serious injury, might be out for the rest of the season. Obviously, we've seen with Liverpool, they can't get anything going at all. Manchester United are getting the job done, got the job done again today, but maybe with Casemiro and Eriksen not there, it's not going to be quite as straightforward for them either. Like there's, with what, over a third of the season remaining, it does feel it's very hard to call what's going to happen.
Yeah, but it's much more interesting for that. You know, I mean, it becomes so predictable about, let's say, the traditional top six. Be it that 1 out of the 6 may have had a bit of a dip or a problem over recent years, but, you know, it has been about City, Liverpool 1-2, and then, you know, is it or United occasionally second, but generally City, Liverpool, United, then a scrap with Arsenal and Spurs, Chelsea in there as well from season to season, but not in the recent seasons. In around those, that's 6. But now suddenly, you know, I mentioned this to you earlier today, that the top 4 from last year are all having their troubles. Manchester City not being as convincing or as dominant, let's say, as they've been in previous years. They've got a chance to go back to the top, as we've already discussed for Wednesday night. But then behind them, from last year's top 4, you've got Liverpool struggling, Chelsea struggling, Spurs struggling, Arsenal better, much better, Manchester United better now, under Ten Hag, but other clubs bubbling up and playing with consistency and doing well, the likes of Brentford and Brighton, you'd say in particular. Fulham, another one. You know, you'd say that can't really last, but it's made this season a lot more enjoyable. It's made a lot of the matches much less predictable as well, and more enjoyable because of that. And, you know, what do you put it down to? Probably more because of that World Cup. We wondered what impact the Winter World Cup, as it was played in our winter, let's say, very unusually, never happened before. What impact was it going to have on the teams and the players? Well, I would suggest at the moment it's having more impact on the teams that are near the top, who had more players at the World Cup, than the teams who are, let's say, middle table or lower range teams. It's had much more impact on the top teams with the top players, and that has helped to even things out a little bit. But it's set up for a very interesting. I mean, looking at Manchester United's position today, they've suddenly got an awful lot closer with a win today to the top 2, where you were saying the top 2 are well away. They're back, where were they, 45 points, I think, today. Which, well, City were 45 going into match. Yeah. City are 48. So you're going, well, God, it's much more even than we thought, and there's going to be a scramble with Newcastle now being in touch, and in what you said, they've just dropped off a little bit lately, but they're in touch with the top 4 and have a real chance of making it. So I think it makes it all much more interesting for supporters of some long-suffering clubs who just accept, well, we might get a cup run, but we've not had cup runs in recent years because the big clubs have dominated the cup competition as well. It's been, you know, Arsenal, Liverpool, Manchester City, Manchester United in recent years, apart from the odd exceptional season when you had a strange one win it like Leicester and Wigan have done. But other than that, even the cup has been dominated by the big six as well, without Spurs being one of those. Chelsea, of course, been in it.
Great stuff, Brian.